I want to have a successful career and I want to have that level of financial abundance alongside love and family time, what does that look like for me? And this is where stepping into your ideal self, or what we can call your future self, is so important. So it's about thinking, okay, who is she? Who is that woman? And what does she do differently? So what do I need to do differently that will allow me to live that life? And where can I start saying no to certain things? Where can I start delegating things?
Have you ever wondered how you can have the family, the career, the social life, and everything else and still feel amazing and not get really run down and burnt out? Does it feel like it's not possible to achieve that? Or maybe you've tried to have the career and the family all at the same time, but you've been left feeling like you've got mum guilt and you're not performing at work and just feeling like you're not performing as well as you want to all round. Well, you're going to love today's episode because I've got Angela Foster on the podcast, and she is a nutritionist, biohacker, and founder of High Performance Health. And she is all about helping you to perform at your very best. She's been there. She has experienced the burnout. She has the struggles with hormonal issues like endometriosis and PCOS. And through good nutrition and lifestyle and biohacking, she has managed to put that pretty much behind her to be thriving and living her best life. And that's what she does and helps women to achieve as well. So if that sounds good to you, then you're going to want to listen to the very end of this one. Welcome to The Thriving Metabolism. I'm Louise Digby, your host, and I'm a nutritionist, weight loss expert, and founder of the Nourish Method to Lasting Fat Loss. Welcome back. As I've said, we have got Angela on the podcast today, and Angela is a high performance coach, and I'm really interested to hear your story, Angela, and how you came to be in this line of work. So welcome, and perhaps you could start by talking us through what your story is and how you got into health and nutrition.
Yeah, sure, Louise. First of all, thanks for having me here. It's lovely to be here with you today. It's a bit of a checkered route, really, because I started out as a corporate lawyer working in London, doing very long hours, lots of kind of weekends and pulling all-nighters to get the deal through. And that, as you will know, set the stage for some adrenal dysfunction that was to come. But at the time, I didn't really know it. And I could see that I was getting recurrent infections, mainly chest infections and things. And I was also starting to encounter problems. Well, I suppose problems that I'd had with hormones that were showing up a bit more strongly than they had in my teenage years. And unfortunately, they hadn't been investigated then. I fell into that category of young girls who at the time, birth control pill was just readily prescribed. So any kind of problem you had, it was like, oh, just take birth control, even though it was not for birth control. So I fell into that category. And I got to the point where in my late 20s, my husband and I were looking at starting a family. I stopped taking the birth control pill and I realized that I just wasn't having any periods at all. And so then I went for some investigation and had discovered that I had PCOS and also endometriosis, which explained many of the symptoms that I'd been getting, and had quite extensive surgery. And then I was met with the prognosis of your next 6 months are the best time to start a family if you're thinking about it, because we've lasered and cut everything away and it was quite extensive. So I was in this position where I was then going for partnership at the law firm and thinking about having a baby at the same time. I was like, you know what, maybe one of these will come off in the next sort of 12 months. And as it happens, I made partner when I was 8 months pregnant. It was a bit crazy. I went off on maternity leave, and then the advice was, because of, I was fortunate to have fallen pregnant so quickly, that if I wanted another one, to have them close together. So by the time I was due to go back, I was 3 months pregnant with my second child, and I experienced postnatal depression pretty badly. And that then continued. I recovered in between my second and third child, but it got particularly bad after my third. And then a couple of years later, I was eventually then diagnosed with major depressive disorder. And It was very difficult to stabilize my mood. I was on bipolar medication and it was quite extensive, unfortunately, and that really took its toll on my immune system. And I think that I was just struggling so much by this point that I'd really created this kind of prison in my own mind because I just wanted these thoughts to end, which then leads you down that sort of thoughts of suicide and things, but thinking, how can I leave these 3 young children without a mother? So I felt trapped and they got a kind of cough, as kids do. And then that ended up with me being hospitalized for double pneumonia, viral and bacterial. And that was the turning point in my life because that's where I went to the hospital, they'd done an x-ray, it looked pretty bad. And I found myself there being called back in to say, your lymph glands are really enlarged. We need to investigate this. And I was thinking, God, we know I've got pneumonia. I've been having repeated antibiotics, but what else is this? And I asked them, you keep talking about my lymph glands. Do you think it could be cancer or lung cancer or something like that? They said, well, it's hard to say otherwise without a CT scan. So I was then rushed through to a CT scan, but it turned out actually it was just really extensive viral and bacterial pneumonia. I was then immediately admitted, not able to pick up the kids from school. And that's when I felt kind of, I guess, a sense of the world coming crashing down. I was neutropenic, so my white blood cell count was low, and there was a very real chance that I wasn't going to get out of there. And that was really the defining moment for me where I took a long, hard look and realized I'm going to have to change things. My mental, my spiritual, my physical health are all on the floor. I need to address this. And that's when I made a commitment to myself that if I got out of hospital, I was going to get really well. And that sparked my interest in nutrition, in health optimization, in understanding hormones. And then the high performance health, really, my podcast came about when I tried to marry up the two worlds, because I was in this very fortunate position where I didn't need to work at that point, so I could focus 100% on my health. But then it dawned on me, how can I combine these two worlds? And it was over time that I realized that really, if you do want high performance on a sustained basis, then health is that tectonic plate. It is the foundation. A bit of a long story, but that's how I ended up here today.
Yeah, it's an amazing story. It sounds like you had a real journey and you really hit rock bottom, and that was the turning point for you. So what did the recovery from that look like for you?
The recovery was hard. It was uphill. It was obviously when you make a decision like that, your positivity in terms of your commitment goes up, right? Because I had a mission that was bigger than myself. I wanted to be there to see my kids grow up, and that was my guiding light. But there were so many pieces in order for me to get well. I had to look at my mental health a lot more closely and really work on that. So I was doing that with psychotherapy and also a combination of medication. Then I was looking at my gut health. Obviously, I'd had so much antibiotics by this point and lost a lot of weight. So it was like, how can I heal my gut, get myself back, give myself the right nutrients and things to support high energy, focusing on my sleep, tracking these things. And then as I got stronger, working on the fitness component, and then just really building up from there.
Okay. A lot of people who are experiencing burnout or hitting that rock bottom with their health, it must feel like it's a insurmountable thing to be able to overcome that and get yourself to a point where you are functioning at a normal level, let alone to a high performance level. How does one start that journey of figuring out how they can actually start functioning again at a more normal level?
Such a great question. And I think it varies depending on the individual's circumstances and whether there is, because burnout doesn't always come with a mental health component. Obviously, it's very challenging in terms of mental health because you feel so terrible. But then you may have people who, on top of it, like myself, were dealing with something like major depressive disorder or bipolar. And that is its own kind of thing to deal with, if you like, alongside. And many of the changes that we apply to burnout, as you'll know from working with your clients, is you start to see improvements on an energetic level, and when you're supporting the health of the gut and you're helping with the sort of serotonin and things, it's having that knock-on effect. But I think that just from both perspectives, and maybe people listening to this are struggling with mental health on its own, right? And it's not so much burnout. And I think that really granting yourself grace is the first step, and just acknowledging yourself, because I found that so hard. We all have that inner voice that tells us we should be doing more, we should be better, I should be this, I should be that. And as Tony Robbins says, you end up shitting all over yourself. It's not a positive thing at all. But actually, at this point, to get ahead over the long term, you almost need to expect less of yourself. And I think that just breaking it down and thinking, how can I show up today and what do I need to do? And really visualizing yourself. A lot of the work I do is how can we step into our ideal self? A book that inspired me was Dr. Joe Dispenza's book, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. And I knew I had to break the habit of being myself, of these destructive thoughts that were leading to me, my son spending an hour and a half trying to get me out of bed in the morning because I was so depressed, not taking care of myself, so ill. So I had to effectively create a new self. And I think when you have that sense of purpose that's bigger than you, that's driving you, you can do that. But what you're really doing is then thinking about who is she? Like, how does she show up? How does she show up as a parent? Chances are she really does take care of herself. If you want to be a good parent or you want to be a good leader in your organization or whatever it is, a good partner, you take care of yourself. That's the primary thing, because it's such a kind of old expression, you can't pour from an empty cup, but it's the truth. So I think the first step is actually really acknowledging yourself and giving yourself that grace and that freedom to explore things without criticism and just thinking, I'm going to trust here a little bit and bringing some curiosity.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think so many women put their own needs last and put everyone else's needs first. And it's so difficult to make that time for yourself to do the things you need to do when you're putting everyone's needs in front of you. I know that's something that so many of my clients can struggle with. How does someone start to break that habit of really belittling their needs and putting everyone else first?
I think this sort of level of cognitive dissonance actually can cause you to have low mood, right? Is when you're aware that, you know what, maybe I'm not showing up as my best self. Maybe I'm really irritable with my family. And I don't mean to be. And then I beat myself up at the end of the day. And I didn't mean to react that way. But it's because I'm so tired, because I haven't taken care of myself. So I think it's about helping and having some boundaries. And also one of the things that really helped me when I was seeing a psychologist was just, if you're in a relationship with a partner, is just feeling like opening that door for them to do some things. Like my husband built better relationships with my children through the process of me not feeling I had to do everything. You know, it's so easy that we assume we must. And actually that's where his relationship really started to blossom with them, because I gave him the opportunity. And I think so often we haven't created that gap for them to step into, right? So we're not even allowing them to be their best selves in that situation because we feel that we have to do it all. And that's a self-compulsion more than anything else.
Yeah, that's so interesting. We can be irritated with them for not stepping up and doing more, but they got to have that opportunity to do it in the first place. Yeah. I know you mentioned that you were diagnosed with PCOS and endometriosis. How did that impact how you approach your health and well-being?
PCOS, I think, is a metabolic disorder at its core. And so understanding for me that that's not something that's just for my menstruating years. I'm 48. I'm not far off, obviously, going through that transition, but that's still going to be there. So addressing it as what it is was, I found, really helpful. So understanding the link with blood glucose control. When I was about to have the surgery, the medical team prescribed me metformin, which I know is a great drug for many people. I couldn't actually even swallow food when I was on it. So it wasn't an option. And in many respects, I'm grateful for that, because it meant that there wasn't a medication that I could use to allow me to continue as I was. So I needed to address things like how I was controlling my blood glucose, what I was eating, and also to a degree, stress levels, right? Because cortisol and stress was having an impact on my hormonal health and also on my mental health and on my energy levels and that burnout. So I think it all interlinks. But I think with PCOS, what I've learned is I respond better to a lower carb diet, but that doesn't mean that you need to go keto or super low carb by any stretch of the imagination. It just means that you need to have carbohydrates that are whole foods, that are intact with fiber, that have protein and healthy fats and things like that. I know that I have less flexibility, and that's a shame. I know that if I eat sugar, I'm going to break out. Like, that just is a given, that just happens. And I think that it takes a lot more commitment. But I think for women who have PCOS, if you actually work on your metabolic health, you're going to feel so much better, because when your blood sugar's out of control, you don't feel great anyway, even if you're not aware of it.
Yeah, definitely. Some of the people listening might suspect that they have PCOS or endometriosis, and it can be so difficult to actually get a proper diagnosis, can't it? How can someone figure out whether they have something like this going on, and whether they need to be paying attention to their metabolic health?
Endometriosis, as you say, is really difficult to diagnose. And with me, they've occasionally seen it on a transvaginal, like an internal scan. Often it won't show up. And pregnancy is an amazing cure for endometriosis, but you can't spend your life pregnant. But it definitely got progressively better for me. And also as I improved my diet and I had less inflammation, the endometriosis really improved. I think that there are blood tests that can be done. I don't think they always show it. With endometriosis, unfortunately, it is laparoscopy, should I say, or some kind of like actual evidence of going in and having a look. With PCOS, you can have blood work and you can have transvaginal scans done that may show some of the cysts. But, there's sort of rebound PCOS people can get following taking birth control, as you know, and that's fairly transient. So I think for people to, first of all, understand, am I skipping periods? Do I have a regular cycle? Particularly if you're thinking about fertility, because that was the most frustrating thing for me was if you don't have a regular cycle, you have less opportunity to fall pregnant. And that's stressful, particularly when your friends and everyone else. I think peer group pressure there, like it shouldn't play a part, but it feels like it does because you see everyone else and maybe they're having a baby and you're like, God, I'm not even having periods properly. So I think it's really important if that is you address it so you start to understand and get some help. And I think that often from a medical perspective, you're not necessarily going to get that nutritional advice that you need to support you to bring it back in balance. What I would say to people is, can you do this? Yes, absolutely. When I do my blood work and I look at things like my HbA1c, so a long-term glucose indicator, sometimes now we're lucky, right? We have CGMs, we're continuous glucose monitor, and I'll wear those periodically to check in and see how am I doing. I think it's great feedback, but it looks really good. And I think people shouldn't necessarily take away from it and go, oh my God, I've got PCOS, this is terrible. Because actually, if you can get the hormones back in balance, then you should have a more regular menstrual cycle. And I think it was that understanding for me when I started reading about it, and this was while I was still practicing as a lawyer, that there was a link between my elevated blood glucose and insulin going high and luteinizing hormone that helps us to ovulate. And when I understood that link and I brought my blood glucose back into balance, my periods came back more regularly. Having said that, mine was so extensive that I did require the cyst to be lasered off. I had ovarian drilling. I had quite extensive procedures, but it was well worth it because afterwards I was able then to return to, with the right nutrition plan, to return to a regular menstrual cycle.
That's really helpful to hear because I think so many women are told that what they eat is going to have no impact on their hormones or on things like endometriosis. And you can feel really disempowered because the only option is what the doctors are offering you. And often they don't have the answers. So I've certainly seen it in my clients that if you can get those hormones back into balance, then the conditions can be really manageable. And while they might not completely go away, they can very much become more of a background thing and something that is livable with, and you can have regular menstrual cycles.
100%.
So I just want to jump back to talking a little bit more about burnout, because I think for a lot of people, they don't know that they've got a problem until they've got a problem, right? They don't know until they are in it. So what are some of the warning signs that someone might be on the path to burnout?
I think one of the things that we use with our clients in terms of high performance, which is a relatively new metric that people are hearing about to measure and really gives you a good understanding of how your nervous system is holding up, is if you have access to it. And I think Apple Watch now does this as well, and possibly Fitbit, but certainly things like the Oura Ring and Whoop straps allow you to look at heart rate variability. And often we think that if the average person's heart beats at 60 beats per minute, then that would be rhythmic in nature and there would be 1 beat per second. Actually, as you know, that more variability is generally positive. And so everyone's heart rate variability is different. But these devices will measure your heart rate variability while you're sleeping. And that's when we build capacity. So if we've had a really good night's sleep and we were to take a morning HR reading, even if we've worked out really hard the day before, we might see a momentary drop. But as long as we have the right balance in our lives of recovery alongside that stress, because stress is good, that's how we grow in every sense of the word, then we should see our heart rate variability, if it drops a bit, to come back up. And so looking at that as a metric is really helpful. I think that When I went through burnout, that data wasn't available. So I was just pushing, and that was just what we did in the law firm. We would just push to get the deal through, and that was expected of us. But I think now we have access to data, we can understand if it starts to drop by about 20%, we're under recovering. So we need to put more recovery in. And it might not always be possible. Someone listening to this might have a young baby that they're up through the night. But if you're seeing a metric like this, or you're not feeling well, you're feeling tired, then take a nap. Give yourself what's known as non-sleep deep rest. There's plenty of scripts on YouTube that you can do some NSDR to relax, doing a meditation, doing mindfulness. These things are shown to have positive changes and actually to help to reduce that sleep debt that we're accumulating. So I think that really taking care of ourselves, and if we have access to data, understanding how to use it. I would say that when people start looking at HRV, most people then look at athletes' HRV and people who've got really high HRV, and then it becomes a bit competitive. It's, oh my God, my HRV is so low. And then that causes anxiety, which we don't want it to. The key thing is to get a baseline for you because, about a third of this is genetic, about another third is age, and then you've got a third that you're sort of controlling more with lifestyle choices. And so once we establish a baseline for you, then we can look at it and go, okay, are you deviating from this baseline? And also, can we improve it? Because that baseline may not be your true genetic potential because you haven't yet addressed it. So that would be one thing that I would look at that's much easier to do. You don't need to be in a clinic to do it. You can get lots of data from these wearables, and that can start to help you understand your energy levels.
That's so interesting. And it's funny that we're having this conversation now because a week or so ago, I hopped over to Canada for a few days and came back, and I had jet lag, and I was surprised at how much it impacted me. And I looked at my Fitbit and I saw that my heart rate variability was out of the normal range. And then I was telling a friend about it who does like hypnosis, and she sent me over a recording to listen to, which was like to get me into a deep meditative state. And I've been doing that a little bit, and it really has helped me to feel back to normal again. And obviously your body kind of gets there eventually when you're recovering from jet lag. But if you're someone who's very busy and very highly stressed anyway, then you might not actually properly recover. So adding in these types of things are going to help you to get there a little bit quicker and just feel more normal more quickly.
100%. And I think people often think, I don't have time. I'm so busy, I don't have time. And here's the thing, right? NASA's done research on this. I think it's something like people who nap are 39% or 37% more productive than people who don't. Microsoft has done research on people who they put an EEG, so a cap on their heads that's measuring brainwaves. And they find that people who go from one meeting to the next, successive meetings, without a break, their brainwave activity increases so that they develop more anxiety, right? You want to be more prone to burnout. But those who took a 10-minute break in between meetings actually stayed very calm. And if you think about how much more you are able to bring in terms of creativity and flow and productivity in that situation, it's a false economy to think that as we did as lawyers, no, I've just got to keep going and do it at all costs, which is the fast track to burnout.
Definitely. So taking little breaks are going to help you to get more out of the time that you do spend working, for sure.
100%. Yeah.
Many women want to have it all in terms of they want the career, they want the family, they want a full life, and they want to do it while feeling really good and not burning out. So how do you have all that without burning out?
It's absolutely possible. And that's essentially my life's work, is demonstrating through what I do and through the women that I work with that it is possible. Some of this is about prioritization and really understanding what's important. I think as women, we're so willing to help other people and then criticize ourselves when we feel like we're underperforming. And that voice in our head can be a real energy drainer. I think having a degree of boundaries, but when I say that, that's not to push people away. That's not to ignore people. It's more about understanding where am I going and where do I want to get to? Like if I really want to have it all, so if I want to have a successful career and I want to have that level of financial abundance alongside love and family time, like what does that look like for me? And this is where stepping into your ideal self, or what we can call your future self, is so important. Because if you're not experiencing that right now and actually you're feeling really frantic and pushed and pulled in a million different directions, then you're not quite there in terms of who you are yet. So it's about thinking, okay, who is she? Who is that woman? Because there's plenty of them, right, who are able to achieve all of these things. And what does she do differently? So what do I need to do differently that will allow me to live that life? And where can I start saying no to certain things? Where can I start delegating things? There's obviously productivity hacks and time management and all these different things that are great skills to learn. But on a very basic level, I think that Jim Collins, one of the best kind of business writers, always said, if you have more than 3 priorities, you don't have any. So what if we just set less at the beginning of the day? Like, what are the 1 to 3 things? And I usually set them the night before with my clients. What are the 1 to 3 things that are my absolute priorities tomorrow? If I get those done, just one of those, I know it's going to be a great day. And start there and celebrate your wins along the way.
Yeah, celebrating the wins is so important, isn't it? For sure. I want to ask you quickly also about biohacking, because I know it's something that is a big part of what you do. And a lot of people listening might not have heard of biohacking before. So can you tell us a little bit about that and what that looks like?
Yes, so biohacking is essentially the ability to influence your internal and external environment so that you can use those inputs, if you like, to influence your own biology. So it's helping you to become the healthiest version of yourself. Now, there's very simple things that are biohacking that are free, right? Most of them are. You were talking there about jet lag. If you go and ground yourself, so you put yourself barefoot on the grass or on sand, that's going to help to offset a lot of that positive radiation that you accumulated during the flight. But grounding is a form of biohacking, right? It's hacking into your biology. Similarly, going and getting access to early morning light is going to help to align your circadian rhythm and bring you back into this time zone. Biohacking can be taken a step further where you start to try to create that natural ancestral world through devices and things. And one example of that would be red light therapy. We know that red light therapy, near infrared and red light is great for enhancing mitochondrial health. So that's something that anyone struggling with burnout could look at as an adjunct, right? They're not going to replace sleep and a healthy diet and fitness and all of those things and great relationships. But having 7 to 10 minutes of red light therapy a day can boost your mitochondrial health. So that would be an example of a biohack, because we would have spent a lot more time outside when we were living in a more ancestral environment. Now we're inside a lot. So it's kind of like, okay, how can I replicate that environment? It's not as a substitute. It's really there to boost things up, particularly when you've got other stuff going on, like you're traveling, or in the UK, for example, in the winter, when we don't have access to a lot of light, that can really start to deplete our energy levels. And you and I are recording this in February, and every year when I look back at photos of me that are taken anywhere between December and February, I can see the difference, right? You just don't look, you don't have that same vitality that we do if we're looking at May, June, July, when we're outside that much more and we've got access to light.
I definitely noticed the difference in the winter, just overall energy levels and productivity takes a bit of a hit. And when I remember to do things like use my light therapy lamp in the mornings and to do some meditation, all those things, then that's when I start to feel more normal again. But you can't beat the longer, warmer days, can you?
No, you can't. You're absolutely right. And another good point there, right, is vitamin D. So many people are deficient in vitamin D, and that's having an impact on your overall health and your mood and your immune system and all of those things. But I think these sort of biohacks, as we call them, are great, but they should be on top of you trying to do all the essential things. And really, when I created biosyncing, that was born out of my own biohacking journey, because when I was following a lot of the biohackers and getting my own health back on track, most of them were men, and a lot of what they were talking about was for the male body. And what I realized is they weren't taking account of women's female hormones and our infradian rhythm in terms of that menstrual cycle. So biosyncing was really developed as a form of biohacking for women, because it's about syncing with your female physiology, as well as syncing with things like your circadian rhythm, but also syncing with what we call your bioindividuality. So like, where are you right now in your life? Because there are seasons in life. Maybe you've got young children, but you're comparing yourself to someone who's an empty nester. And it seems like, yeah, they can focus on lots of other things that perhaps you can't do. And so I think embracing where we're at, embracing our own genetics and that genetic potential, and understanding that we're individuals is also a key part of it.
Yeah, definitely ensuring that you're taking an approach that's actually adapted to your individual needs and challenges and life stages is so key. And it's when we're trying to compare where we're at to other people that we can end up getting ourselves a bit muddled and not really be taking steps that are aligned with where we are and where we want to be. So how can people find out more about what you do?
In terms of social media, I'm most active on Instagram, which is at Angela S. Foster. And then my podcast, which Louise has been on, it's about to come out in the next few weeks, is High Performance Health, if you want to come over and listen on there. And then if you just want to get a snapshot of where you are right now and think, when I talk about health, I talk about a shift protocol, right? How do we shift into optimal health? And so those areas are sleep, hormones, the insights we're gathering, how we're fueling our body and mind, and how we're training our body and mind. And you can get a snapshot of where you are in each area of shift by taking our free biohacking quiz, and we'll send you a personalized report, completely complimentary, which will be complete with all recommendations on how to improve it. You can book a free call with one of our coaches, and that's over at yourtotalhealthcheck.com.
Amazing. And we'll pop that in the show notes as well. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It's been so interesting. I feel like I could talk to you all day. We've still got so many questions, but you've got important things to go and do. But thank you again for joining us, and we'll speak soon.
Thank you so much, Louise. It's been an honour.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. I really hope that you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed talking with Angela. All of her stuff is going to be in the show notes. And if you don't already, please make sure that you follow this podcast in your podcast app or on YouTube or wherever you listen. Make sure you hit follow, because apparently many of you listen along routinely but haven't actually hit follow yet, and it makes a really big difference to my podcast and helping it to reach more people if you just hit that little follow button. So thank you so much in advance for doing that. If you want to connect with me, you can reach me via my website, louisedigbynutrition.com, and you can find me on social media by searching at Louise Digby Nutrition. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.